Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Earth Day Everyday podcast, where we aim to spotlight exemplary activists, policymakers, and changemakers in the field of sustainability and climate change. I'm your host, Aryan Doshi, and today we are extremely lucky to be joined by Matt. Matt is a consultant at Schlegel Consulting, the author of the book Teamwork 9.0, and is a member of the Elders Climate Action Program. Matt, it is absolutely wonderful to have you with us today.
So great to be here, Aaron.
Yeah, I know we had met at the Elders Climate Action just a few weeks ago, but there's so many different topics I wanted to touch on today, and maybe we can just start with the fact that we've just been through an atmospheric river here in the Bay Area. We've seen flooding in so many areas. Maybe we can just start by for you, why do you think this has been becoming more and more of a common effect?
Well, yeah, as the Earth heats up, the atmosphere holds more water,
Yeah,
and in the northern hemisphere, we've heated up almost 2 degrees. I think it was about
yeah,
1.8
yeah,
degrees C in just the northern hemisphere, which is
yeah,
warmer than the global average because of all the land mass.
yeah, yeah.
And so that is roughly about 13% more water in the
Wow.
atmosphere than there used to be. So
Yeah,
when we get these events, which we've had atmospheric rivers before, but
absolutely.
now they just have a lot more water.
And
And then on top of that, the jet stream has become unstable, so it wobbles around more. So you're
yeah,
getting this warm air and this cold air hitting each other,
for
and that
sure.
causes a lot of rain. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's climate change causing just a lot more severe weather events.
Yeah, and there's so much science behind it, right? And it's unfortunate you see so many people, despite seeing that science, still have this rigidity towards, accepting it as an actual issue. And I know we talk about, global, or we talk about the atmospheric river, that's one end of the spectrum, but you also have global warming at the other end of the spectrum. And as we see more of these maybe natural and human-induced consequences, is there any sort of maybe, technology that you've come across that counters directly the effects of warming, or you think could have potential in the future?
Well, the number one cause
Yeah,
of the warming is that we are putting more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
for sure.
So the first thing to do would be to stop putting as much greenhouse gas into the atmosphere.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and the two main greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide and methane, which are the result of the carbon dioxide is mostly the result of burning fossil fuels. So, in as much as we can reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, that will help on that end. And then the methane, a lot of that comes from animal agriculture. So that's a big contributor, both
Yeah,
the beef and the dairy industry. So in as much as we can start to contain those industries, we would reduce methane emissions. And then I think there's low hanging fruit on there is more satellites out there that are monitoring methane emissions. So we're going to get a much clearer picture of where methane is coming from. And there's just a lot of methane leakage in the
yeah,
system, right? If there were no leakage of
yeah,
methane, then it would turn into carbon dioxide, which
yeah,
isn't good, in
yeah,
the liquid natural gas industry or the methane gas industry. We'll burn it and turn it into carbon dioxide, but as you know, methane is much more potent than carbon
so true.
dioxide.
Yeah,
So in as much as we can contain the leakages, like capping wells, unused wells,
absolutely. Yeah,
making sure that we do a better job of monitoring our methane infrastructure and catch leaks early and
for
contain
sure.
them. That will also reduce a lot of the leakage and therefore the greenhouse gas in the air.
Yeah, it's almost as if the way you describe it, right, with leakages, it's the sense of circularity, right? If we could find a way to prevent it from having a way out, right, and essentially just find a way to reintegrate it back somehow without letting it, go into the atmosphere. That would be the ideal situation, right? But there's
Exactly.
something else which you brought up, which I think is really important, which is, this notion of consumption in today's world, right? Maybe somewhat of a tangential topic is today when we think about, building, the next iPhone, right? The next computer, right? The next right? A lot of the times we forget about where do these modern day products come from, right? They come from countries like, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you have modern slavery and children being forced to extract copper, right? That's what leads to overconsumption. That's what leads to waste. And there's, I guess, more of like a dark and hidden history to that whenever we see, the rapid effects of technology. And so waste is also, right, another really tangential topic when we talk about climate, when we talk about landfills. And so from your experience, have you seen any ways to not only deal with, maybe like the common physical waste, but maybe digital e-waste, and then also think about where does this consumption like come from, and maybe address that as well.
Yeah, that it is such a big that is such a big challenge because we're especially here in the United States, we are
Yeah.
such a consumption driven society. And everybody wants the latest and greatest new thing,
Yeah.
and a lot of this then ends up being turned into waste.
Yeah.
I think where there are policy things that can happen,
Sure.
and I kind of look to the European Union for the some leadership in that.
Hmm.
Like just recently they said that iPhones, the Apple product,
Yeah.
they have to use USB-C and not their own
Wow.
proprietary charger,
Yeah.
which is great now because because a lot of us have USB-C chargers.
Exactly.
Now we
That's
don't
one
need to
way to
go get
reduce.
yet another one just for that phone,
Yeah.
right? So, and I know that's a little thing, but it ends up creating, a lot of waste when everybody needs to have, seven different things for each
Exactly. Chargers.
device,
Yeah.
right? If we have standardization, then we can have that interchangeability, and we won't need to buy yet another thing to power something. So I like that.
Yeah, and I think that the charger you brought up is a great example, right? And especially when we talk about waste, like if you just take any random product, right, whether that even be a shoe, right, our first inclination today is, our shoe has a hole, right, let's just throw it away. But there's never that inclination like we had in the 1970s, 1980s. You had these cobbler stores, you go take your shoe, you stitch it up back together, and then now you have a new shoe that either you could use, maybe your brother sister could use. So it gets passed down, right, and you ensure
Yeah.
that that one shoe, simple product, it's not going to end up in the landfill, but it'll be reintegrated back into the economy. And so you create this sense of circularity. I think one thing that's maybe lacking though is incentivization, right? Like what motivates or what incentive do people have to really pursue this path of circularity, right? Is that something you've come across? Like why should they, and how do we sort of, broadcast that mission and that message?
Right, right. And I think the incentives have to be put on the producers. In other words, and this is where I think policy would come into play. Is for a company like Nestle that produces so much single-use plastic,
For sure.
and then that waste product that they
Yeah.
sell, it just ends up being pollution in our environment, and then the environment just ends up being a dumping ground for something that they made, and they have no liability or culpability for it. And I
Yeah.
think that's what really needs to change. Because as long as the corporations that are manufacturing this waste product have no liability for the waste they're producing, then why not do it? It's
Yeah.
cheaper. They can make more profit.
Exactly.
So I think that's where you're going to see policies in place, and probably again, and I don't know any details, but again, you could look to the EU probably for
Sure.
leadership on this. The other thing is, if you're concerned about it as an individual, you can start to look for packaging that is non-plastic.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s, everything was in glass and metal.
Yeah. You had the
Glass and
milk
metal
person come
works.
deliver milk to your door, right?
Right. I mean, it's, paper, plastic, and metal are much better than excuse me, paper, metal, and glass are much better than plastic.
Yeah.
So you can look for products that are packaged in those on a personal level. But I think as long as the corporations don't have any liability for polluting the planet with cheap plastic, they'll just continue to do it.
Yeah, no, and I think those two words you sort of brought up there, right? Liability and accountability. If that's something we can get all manufacturers to think about, that would have an incredible impact. And you bring up Nestle, and just the other day I was reading about, another competing chocolate company called Pony's Chocolonely, and they're on a mission to build the world's first slave-free bar of chocolate. And so they actually sort of, minimize or try to minimize any sort of slave labor that's used in countries across the world, and then they create a bar of chocolate to sort of represent that. So that's something that I thought was fascinating, just because you brought up the idea of Nestle. And I was
So
also
just
reading.
coincidentally, I had some the other day, and I noticed that
Yeah,
the packaging is
exactly. Yeah.
all paper with a foil wrapper, so a metal wrapper. So it's just metal and paper.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of where we want the big companies like Nestle to sort of transition towards eventually in the future, right? Minimizing that plastic and eventually going into more sustainable forms of packaging.
Yeah.
And I was also reading the other day, or I was watching one of your videos about degrowth and trying to minimize overconsumption, right? Can you maybe talk about that notion, that idea of degrowth, and how we want to maybe minimize GDP and why that might not be a bad thing?
Right, right. So degrowth, just the concept in general is an idea for an economy that has us all living equitably within the limits of what the planet is capable of carrying. So
Yeah.
that within the carrying capacity of the Earth.
Yeah.
And one model for this type of system is called donut economics. I don't know if you've heard of
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and so it's saying that we would live within the donut. We wouldn't be in the hole, and we wouldn't be outside of the donut. The outside of the donut represents the planetary boundaries.
Yeah.
And so we need to start living within those
In those.
boundaries.
Yeah.
And then the whole is where people are not living, like a minimal sustainable life. So we
Yeah.
want to make sure that everybody
Yeah.
has, enough to eat and drink and clothing and food, to be able to live a life not in poverty. And we have enough resources to do this if we move people out of poverty and up into the donut, and then we start to bring down our the industries and the lifestyles that are way outside of the bounds and bring them back into the donut. Then we can all start to manage ourselves and our planet in a way that is sustainable for all of humanity.
Yeah, and I think that is such a great idea, right? But when we think about, I guess maybe, people who look at the donut economy, and you look at the wealth gap today, right? With one of my favorite quotes that I've heard is, if just the 15 richest people today woke up, right, you could solve so much of poverty today, right?
Right.
But I guess there's that what's in it for us mindset, right? Like when you think about a concept like the donut economy, and it's maybe more of a philosophy approach, but how do you get, individuals from all facets of society to look at maybe the donut economy, and counter the mindset of what's in it for us?
Right. And these are all great questions, and I really don't have that simple answers for
Yeah.
this. It's it's we humanity always kind of builds on what we already have, right? So um when we talk about these types of concepts,
Yeah.
often a response will be, well, we're not going to go back and live in caves.
Yeah.
And yes, We are not going to go back and live in caves. We are going to continue to progress and move forward, building on what we already have.
Yeah,
And we can look at these transitions in our evolution, our societal, our cultural evolution, and see where there have been transitions.
for sure.
And because what happens at these transitions is we'll go into a new phase. So I'll just, as an example,
Yeah,
enlightenment, right? So in the age of enlightenment, we moved into this more of the system outside of at least in Western society, was kind of these rule based,
sure. Yeah,
mostly religious, but also feudal, systems,
yeah,
and then more into a scientifically based system. And out of that, science became very important,
for sure.
and it still is today, right? So we're
Yeah,
kind of still living with the legacy of that transition. But one of the things that happened in that transition is we increasingly separated ourselves from our spiritual connection to the earth and to the planet.
for
And we
sure.
started to look at things, more atomistically rather
Yeah,
than holistically, which is kind of the principle of especially Western science, is
yeah,
breaking things down to their parts.
yeah,
And then in that process, while we were able to make these huge, great, wonderful advancements, losing that spiritual connection with our home has caused all these problems.
yeah,
And the side effects are, ecological damage, the climate catastrophe, and all of this stuff, which is just a natural result of doing that. And
yeah,
so maybe now there's this pendulum swinging back to more of a spiritual awakening, reconnecting back
yeah,
to before that
yeah,
enlightenment period, where the pendulum swings back and says, oh, we are a part of the planet. We
yeah,
are dependent on it. Our DNA is connected with everything around us.
for sure.
There is no planet B that can support us. You can't take our DNA out of this web of life and
Yeah,
expect it to live somewhere else. We are
absolutely.
totally dependent on it. And I think science is informing us of this,
For
right?
sure.
So ironically,
Yeah,
now that we understand DNA better, we understand where we came from. We're
yeah,
understanding it's like we are connected with everything. We're connected with all these flows of energy around us, and we're just a part of this
an
flow.
ecosystem. Yeah,
And if we disrupt those flows, then we are actually disrupting our
yeah,
ourselves. We won't be able to habitate this planet. So my hope
yeah,
is that as this pendulum swings back, we are going to have this awakening that will allow us to realize our connection, and that will be pervasive enough, and enough people will become like the new enlightenment,
for sure.
um, that we will be able to transition to more of a society that is more like this donut economy we were talking about.
Ex
That's my hope.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal sort of connection, right, to the Enlightenment. And like you said, it is a pendulum, right, in terms of swinging back between more maybe ancestral forms of technology, then moving towards progress. And it's sort of like this back and forth, like you say. I think a pendulum is an excellent metaphor, right? But once we sort of get maybe humans to realize that we are part of this central ecosystem, and if you just attach maybe one string, one connection, then like everything falls apart, right? Then like you said, that would be problematic, and maybe that is the message that we have to start pitching. And maybe this is sort of moving to another topic, right? But I think when people think about the environment, their first concern is always about, cost and profit, and it's going to come at, a major consequence, right? But can we maybe sort of uh rectify maybe that misconception, right? I think one sort of example like I like to talk about is if you connect climate to the tourism industry, right? I think a lot of times people forget that a lot of countries, their main source of revenue comes from tourism, right? But when you look at, countries like Australia and iconic landmarks, right? Great Barrier Reef, you look at Africa, another major source of its revenue is tourism. Mount Kilimanjaro has melting glaciers. And so that is maybe a counter side to that, right? Which is that because of climate, you're losing profitability, right? And so how do you sort of deal with that and maybe have companies, manufacturers consider that message as well?
Right. And there's a saying called an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Wow.
And the reason why we have that saying is because humans need to be reminded
Yeah.
that the sooner you take care of something, it will actually be less expensive.
Yeah.
But if we're not reminded of it, then we will, pursue, what we're doing.
For sure.
Humans are interesting, right? Because we get into these patterns, and um, and and when we're in a pattern and it's working,
Yeah.
we don't really want to spend energy to change the pattern.
For sure. Yeah.
And so really it's an energy conservation tool
Yeah.
for our brains.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to energy. But in this case it's
Yeah.
caloric energy from the food we're getting.
For sure.
And our brain is just trying to navigate the world in a way that it's spending the least amount of energy, and having to think about new things takes
Yeah.
energy. Having to change behaviors takes energy. So the brain will keep us from making those changes for as long as it can, until we need to make a change,
Yeah.
right?
Until that moment comes. Yeah.
Right. And unfortunately that often comes at these pivotal points where it's a little bit tragic, like a major hurricane or atmospheric river, or
Yeah.
these they force behavioral changes anyway, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to increasingly see that people will need to make changes.
Yeah.
And in as much as we can provide paths
Yeah.
for people who will now inevitably be disrupted
Yeah.
by climate change, whether where they're living is too hot and
Yeah.
they need to migrate out of
Yeah.
deadly heat,
Yeah.
or their city is becoming inundated with flooding,
For sure.
or just pervasive hurricanes, or whatever it is. Living in the WUI, the wilderness urban interface, where
Yeah.
there's lots of fires. There's all of these things that are are going to force change, and it's already happening. Even like the insurance industry, it's becoming uninsurable to live in
Yeah.
places that are going to be subject to these. And
For sure.
so people are going to increasingly have to get out of there. And in as much as we can have migration paths towards places that are more sustainable, and can provide jobs, can provide somewhat of a security net for people and a safety net for people, then
Those other.
then I think we can make some progress there. So
Yeah.
I think that's how I see it playing out, just
Yeah.
because it's going to happen anyway. And
Yeah.
I want us to do it in the best possible way.
For sure. No, like you say, I think inevitably that is going to be the real sort of catalyst for change. Unfortunately, right? It's only
Right.
when people sort of experience it themselves, whether that be wildfires in California or you just saw Hurricane Milton in Florida.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people were actually contemplating, at that point, do we really want to stay in Florida? Yes, it has, nice sunny weather, but like if insurance is going up and we can't afford it, right? Like you
Right.
said, inevitably they are going to have to migrate, and then maybe they do view the climate crisis with a sense of seriousness
Right.
more than they did before, right?
Right.
But I know before you were also talking about looking at the EU and looking at policy that they have. In one of my prior podcasts, I talked to someone who's living in Holland, and they have like a library of clothing where essentially you go and it's just like think of it like a bookstore, but instead of taking out books, you take out, pieces of clothing, right? And you put the hangers back and you take it out. And so they have this sort of intricately built society that is more conducive towards sustainability.
Right.
Like what policies maybe have you learned from the EU, or like what do you see in the EU that maybe we can try replicating here in the US?
Right. And so I just want to, point out like in my town of Palo Alto,
Yeah,
California,
yeah.
our library system also has a library of things
Wow.
that you can check out.
Yeah,
So you might need a leaf blower, just
yeah, yeah,
want to do something that you're not using all the time,
for sure.
and you just need to borrow.
Yeah,
Then you can just check it out from the Palo Alto Library and borrow it, and then take it back.
yeah,
You can do that, on in your neighborhood as well. So the other day I needed to cut up some wood,
yeah,
and I don't have a chainsaw. And so I asked my neighborhood group, does anybody have an electric chainsaw I could
yeah,
borrow?
yeah,
And sure enough, someone chimed up and said, yeah, I have one. You can borrow it. And
yeah,
so I was able to, go over and borrow that. And I gave them a nice little thank you card and a little
yeah,
gift, for doing that. And so it was a nice way to connect with the neighbor. And then I didn't go out and have to buy, a
yeah,
new
yeah,
thing that
yeah,
would just sit, in my garage.
yeah,
So I think, so much of our behaviors are around, oh, I need this thing. I should just go and buy it,
yeah.
but to think first, maybe you can borrow it. I think that's such a great idea. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I think the way you describe the chainsaw, right? I mean, that's like the perfect example of circularity, right? Don't go out and buy a new one when you have someone whose resources you can leverage.
Right.
And that's how you minimize waste. That's how you minimize overconsumption. So I think, if we can have maybe more institutionalized structures like that in society, right, that would have incredible sort of impact. Maybe just a few more questions here, right? Is I know like a few weeks ago, right, we went to Elders Climate Action Program. And I think in today's world, when we talk about, the climate crisis, there's this sense between, older generations, younger generations, a lot of times the blame game about, whose fault it is and why we are in this crisis that we are. And so how do you sort of put someone who's like, 10 years old, someone who's 90 years old or 80 years old, right? Put them in the same room and have them both approach this crisis with the same sense of seriousness that it deserves and same sense of maybe optimism that it also deserves.
Right, right. Well, again, it is a challenge, and I think it really starts with listening, and I'm looking more towards the older people. The
Mhm.
older people need to listen more, and hear the voices of the younger people. Um, the because especially us older people, we've been enculturated into this system,
Yeah,
and a lot of our patterns and behaviors are just have become so automatic,
for sure.
and it's really hard for us to extract ourselves and just
Yeah,
kind of look at it from the outside, whereas young people, they are kind of looking at it from the
yeah,
outside, right? They're new, they're looking at it fresh. They
yeah,
haven't gone through that whole process of
for sure.
you
Yeah,
know being
there's
adulted,
this
um
naivety. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right. And it's a very fresh perspective. It's and just both from a physical reality, it's like looking and seeing and observing what you see in front of you,
Yeah,
with fresh eyes.
yeah,
And then also there's this moral capacity that
sure, sure.
young people have to, like, because humans do have this inner sense of right and wrong, and young people, it's really strong with them. and oftentimes those senses are better
Yeah.
before they've been enculturated
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
than after, right? Because then you become, you just become normalized in
Yeah.
whatever culture that you're in. But it's nice to listen to those perspectives of young
Yeah. Yeah.
people because they have such a great sense
Yeah.
of right and wrong and what's harmful and to others and what's not, and how
Yeah.
to treat people fairly, and all
Yeah.
those things are just so keen with young people. So that's what I really love about working with young people and understanding their perspectives, and then also um, helping them understand that there are some adults
Yeah.
who really do care
Yeah.
about their future.
Yeah.
And, because if they're going into this and seeing most of the adults in their normal patterns,
Yeah.
and they know those patterns are the problem,
Yeah.
it becomes very dispiriting for them.
For sure.
And so they have to know that there are some of us with
Yeah.
gray hair that
Like,
understand
yeah.
and empathize with what they're seeing and what they're feeling, and
Yeah.
that we're going to support them
Yeah.
through this necessarily tumultuous journey
For sure.
that we're all going to be taking here.
Yeah, no, I think that is such wise comments, right? Because ultimately, right, there has to be a sense of accountability from both, older generations and younger generations. But if they can both sort of maybe come together and have optimistic vision, right, that's what we need. And I think the older generations, they are going to bring more of a sense of realism, right? Like one of another questions I sort of like to pitch is um a lot of times there's this sense of negativity towards the climate crisis because like when you think about industries like the coal industry, natural gas industry, if we move towards sustainable forms of transportation at such a rapid pace, then what happens to the workers who hold jobs in the coal industry and they're using that to provide for their families, right? Like they become jobless then, right? And it's also thinking about them, thinking about their future, and that's why maybe there is this sense of resistance, right? And it's that maybe wisdom of the older generation and then the younger generations working together to sort that out, right? So I think that is
Yeah,
something.
and just on that point,
Yeah,
in the U.S., wealthiest country on the planet, we have plenty of resources to take care of everybody.
yeah,
You know that the our the unhoused crisis that we're
yeah,
in, that is, it's our societal choice to do that. We do not have to have that.
yeah,
Poverty, we don't have to do that. Providing for jobs, we could do that, and if we were committed to doing that, we could do it. We have the money, we have the resources. When we see the budgets that we have in that often go
yeah,
towards making weapons of war,
yeah.
we could use a fraction of that and take care of some of these
People
other
in our country,
problems.
yeah,
So the money is there. It's just building the political will to
address those issues.
do that.
Yeah,
And I think we can. I think we will, as we all have this enlightenment, this neo enlightenment that
yeah,
that
yeah.
we're going through.
No, I think that is such a good point to make, right? Because a lot of times we have so much money, but it's oftentimes not used in the correct manner, or oftentimes we push it towards too heavily towards one sector, forget about other sectors, and if we forget about a lot of other people living in the country, like you say. So we do have the opportunity to take care of it, but we just have to make sure we do. And
Right.
maybe on that note, like one sort of closing question I like to end my podcast with is, what do you sort of say to the aspiring environmentalist, right? Like you've been able to make such a tremendous impact in your community, using the circular economy, even if it is on a smaller scale, like with the chainsaw. Like, how do you sort of encourage those actions, or maybe even encourage a career to someone who's has no experience, right? The field is so broad and expansive, they don't know
Right.
where to start.
Right.
So what maybe advice do you have to them, and how can they someday, make the impact that you've been able to make?
Right. Well, so first of all, we all need to be doing everything all at once.
Yeah,
Because, like you said, there's a lot of stuff we need to be doing,
for sure. Yeah,
and so and anything is good. Anything.
yeah,
So what I encourage people to do is like, what is your interest?
yeah,
What is your interest? What gets you up in the morning? What sparks your curiosity? Because whatever it is,
yeah,
there is an environmental and climate component to that.
yeah,
And if you can tie those together, where your passion is, and then apply that
yeah,
to doing something that builds a sustainable habitable planet,
yeah,
for humanity and for all of life,
yeah,
then that's it.
yeah.
Because we all need to be working on all these things.
For sure.
And good thing, bad thing, right? The bad thing is there's a lot to do. The
Yeah,
good thing is there's a lot to do, and there's
exactly.
something just
For
perfect for
sure.
that
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. No, I think that's amazing advice for all our viewers, right? Like you say, the field of environmental science, right? It's so interdisciplinary, right? You can connect like every sort of tad bit to another field and another field, and you can sort of use whatever you're interested in, right, to still sort of create, good societal impact, right? Which is what I think it's all about. And even those maybe small, tiny changes, right? Those still are impactful, right? Do what you can, not what you can't. That's what Rick also told me. So thank you so much, Mac, for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And thank you so much to all our viewers. And we'll see you all on the next episode of Earth Day Every Day. Thank you so much.